Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Thomas H. Johnson edition of the collected works of Emily Dickinson. We are now at poem 608, Afraid of Whom Am I Afraid? This is an interesting poem for a number of reasons. I'm stunned how few Emily scholars have wanted to comment on this poem. The scholar Priest, however, did point out that this is what he calls a tight, orderly poem, a song of fearless faith. No doubt, this is the fierce Emily. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through a set of introductory comments where we commented on Emily as having that unbelievable poetic range. On the one hand, she can talk about, in a poem like this, how she's afraid of nothing. And then on the other hand, we can call up any number of poems where she clearly has concerns, anxieties, and the like. So she has this amazing range as a poet. Our assumptions as well is that you have been studying with us the previous 607 poems. We just finished with 607 of Nearness to Her Sundered Things. Now, if you have already done that reading, you will place this poem within that larger context. When we come to Emily's Promethean voice, can we say it that way? The Promethean voice. In other words, you'll remember Prometheus, the guy who will say to God, I will give fire, in King God Zeus, and even will show a certain level of just direct antagonism for that, of course, punished on a rock with his liver being eaten out and the like. Now, I want you to note the trinities of this poem. There's three important things she says she refuses to be afraid of. And I want you to notice the rhetorical questions that are here. We called our series Chats with Emily for a reason. A number of reasons. And one of those is Emily has this ability to kind of discourse with you, the reader. It's almost as if you, the reader, said to Emily, hey, are you afraid of anything? And Emily responds with, afraid? Of whom am I afraid? Not death, for who is he? The porter of my father's lodge as much abasheth me. Of life? 'Twere odd I fear a thing that comprehendeth me in one or two existences as deity decree. Of resurrection? Is the east afraid to trust the morn with her fastidious forehead? As soon impeach my crown. Now, I want to point out right away, notice this poem begins with an exclamation point after the word afraid and ends with an exclamation point. Emily doesn't want you to miss it, that she will say, I ain't afraid of nothing. And I'm going to prove to you by working through, she says, the order of this poem, I'm going to prove to you that I don't have any reason to be afraid. Afraid of what? Notice she'll say it, afraid, with the exclamation point. Now, it is interesting that she uses this word afraid in 21 of her poems. When we get to poem 1090, we'll play the game this way with Emily and her whole idea of fear. She says in 1090, and this is why we love to compare these poems, I am afraid to own a body. I am afraid to own a soul. We're going to finish, by the way, our conversation with Walt Whitman, Emily's contemporary, Song of Myself 48. I am afraid to own a body. I am afraid to own a soul. Profound, precarious property. Possession not optional. Double estates entailed at pleasure upon an unsuspecting heir. Duke in a moment of deathlessness, and God for a frontier. When we get to that poem, we'll come back to this poem. Notice she'll say, afraid of whom? Notice it's not of what. This is significant. It's not of what am I afraid, but it's rather of whom. Now, it's interesting because she'll speak of death, she'll speak of life, she'll speak of resurrection, and technically all of those are whats and not whom's. So it's fascinating that she says, of whom am I afraid? Deity, by the way, is mentioned in this poem, right? Notice the first one, I'm not afraid of death. Notice the use of the dash here in this poem. We don't have an abundance of dashes in this poem. Of death, dash. For who is he? Again, this is interesting that she'll personify death. I'm not afraid of death. Notice, she doesn't say I'm not afraid of dying. She says I'm not afraid of death. For who is he? Later, life will be called a thing, by the way. And then she'll say it, the porter of my father's lodge as much abasheth me. exclamation point. Now, the porter is interesting here. It takes us, obviously, to that famous scene that she loves so much, the play Macbeth, Act 3. You'll remember Scene 3, when the drunken porter, Act 2, Scene 3, when the drunken porter is guarding the gates of Inverness, and we've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net, and of course, he imagines himself the porter of hell. The porter of my father's lodge. It's interesting she says it this way, because is she talking about a real father, the keeper of her father's house, or is she talking about the father as in the deity that she will mention later? It isn't clear. She says, but either way, it doesn't abash me. Now, you'll remember the word abash from 254. Hope is the thing with feathers. You'll remember abash the little bird. It's the only other time she uses this word in all her poetry. In other words, I'm not afraid of death, of life. Notice how she'll abbreviate here with the question mark. And again, the tone of this poem is, how can I be afraid of life? Notice, by the way, it's not living, it's life. Of life? 'Twere odd, she says, I fear a thing. Now, I haven't been able to discover why in the Johnson edition this word "a" is set off in brackets. But it is, and I think it's significant that Emily maybe wrote it this way. In other words, there isn't anything that I fear about life, a thing, especially life, that comprehendeth me in one or two existences. In other words, this life and the life to come. We'll get to resurrection in a moment. As deity decree, dash. In other words, there seems to be a sense that I'm not afraid of living, either in this life or the life to come. And then finally, of resurrection. Again, notice all these rhetorical question marks. And then notice she'll use a very interesting observation from nature. Is the East afraid to trust the morn with her fastidious forehead? It's a fascinating rhetorical question. In other words, this is that idea that seasons don't fear the reaper, as the famous song says. In other words, why should I be afraid? I have nothing to be afraid of, in the same way that the East doesn't fear the sunrise or the morn. Now, the fact that she uses resurrection here is I think, important. It takes us back to our study of poem 515. You'll remember her use of the word resurrection here. We studied it in some detail. No crowd that has occurred exhibit, I suppose, that general attendance that resurrection does. Circumference be full, the long restricted grave assert her vital privilege, the dust connect and live on Adam's features place. All multitudes that were efface in the comparison as suns dissolve a star, solemnity prevail, its individual doom, possess each separate consciousness, august, absorbed, numb, by the way, your trinities. What duplicate exist, what parallel can be of the significance of this to universe and me? Again, there's that Promethean tone even in this poem. You'll remember resurrection. We saw it in Poem 774, 216, 322, 491. We're, of course, seeing it now in 608. We'll see it again in 876 and 984. It's her use of resurrection in 1530 that, of course, is fascinating. Now, of course, the resurrection is referenced in her King James version of the Bible a number of times. John 11:25, 1 Corinthians 15:20, John 5:28 through 29, Revelation 20. All of those would be references for Emily of the resurrection she's talking about here. I'm interested in 1530. We read it back when we did that poem. We'll do it again when we come to the very end of our study in 1530. A pang is more conspicuous in spring, in contrast with the things that sing, not birds entirely, but minds, minute effulgencies and winds, when what they sung for is undone. Who cares about a bluebird's tune? Why, resurrection had to wait till they had moved a stone. Notice she'll finish by saying, I ain't afraid of nothing. And then she says it, as soon impeach my crown. By the way, fastidious only gets used once in all of her poetry, and it's here. That fastidious forehead, I think it's a key word of the poem. And then it marries rather nicely with impeach. Who could impeach my crown? Now, we've commented already on Emily's use of crown. We saw it when, for example, we were playing around with earlier poems. So 24 of her poems will play this game of crown. When we get to right at the end of our study, 1737, she'll play the game one more time. And listen to the Promethean tone here. Rearrange a wife's affection when they dislocate my brain, amputate my freckled bosom, make me bearded like a man. Blush my spirit in thy fastness, blush my unacknowledged clay. 7 years of troth have taught thee more than wifehood ever may. Love that never leaped its socket, trust entrenched in narrow pain, constancy through fire awarded, anguish bare of Adonine. Burden born so far triumphant, none suspect me of the crown. For I wear the thorns till sunset, then my diadem put on. Big my secret, but it's bandaged, it will never get away till the day its weary keeper leads it through the grave to thee. Well, what are we going to say about a poem like this? I mean, it's an amazing poem, majestic poem in terms of her Promethean voice. I think her argument is there's no reason to fear either death, nor life, nor resurrection. That is to say, fear for her is unnatural in the same way that the East doesn't fear the sun. And to be, well, again, it begins with the exclamation point, it ends with the exclamation point, and everything in between is the defiance that an exclamation point obviously would evince. Now, what stands behind this poem? I think it's her study of John Donne. That she was a great lover of John Donne. And I think that standing behind this is especially John Donne's Holy Sonnet 10, written in 1609, published in 1633. We've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net. But just hear the Promethean voice of Donne. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow, and soon as our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell. The poppy or charms can make us sleep as well and better than thy stroke. Well, why swellest thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. I'm interested, though, in Emily's convergence with Walt Whitman. Now, the origination of the genesis for our series here is that I was working with all of the poems of Whitman's deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass, the 1892 version. And I was contacted by a student who said, after you finish with Leaves of Grass, are you going to pick up Emily Dickinson's 1,775 poems and play the same game? And I said, offhandedly, sure, why not? Only to then, realize the prodigious, the Everest project in front of me and, of course, you guys to work through these poems. Every once in a while, though, we find a convergence where it's amazing to us that Emily and Walt did not somehow find, clandestinely even, a chance to meet and to have that conversation, which would, of course, be the greatest conversation of all poetic conversations. But in some ways, they are conversing. Do you remember this from our study of Talks with Walt? Song of Myself 48. I have said that the soul is not more than the body, and I have said that the body is not more than the soul, and nothing, not God, is greater to one than oneself is. And whoever walks a furlong without sympathy walks to his own funeral dressed in a shroud. And I or you, pocketless of a dime, may purchase the pick of the earth, and to glance with an eye or show a bean in its pod confounds the learning of all times. And there is no trade or employment, but the young man following may become a hero. And there is no object so soft, but it makes a hub for the wheeled universe. And I say to any man or woman, let your soul stand cool and composed before 1,000,000 universes. And I say to mankind, be not curious about God, for I, who am curious about each, am not curious about God. No array of terms can say how much I am at peace about God and about death. I hear and behold God in every object, yet understand God not in the least. Nor do I understand who there can be more wonderful than myself. Why should I wish to see God better than this day? I see something of God Each hour of the 24 and each moment then. In the faces of men and women I see God, and in my own face in the glass. I find letters from God dropped in the street, and every one is signed by God's name. And I leave them where they are, for I know that wheresoever I go, others will punctually come forever and ever. Well, to own a poem like this at 3B, obviously the question is, okay, so how about you? What do you fear? I'm hopeful that Emily is challenging you. Thank you.